Once the border is secured, at a later date, we'll make a determination as to the rest. But we have some bad hombres here, and we're going to get them out.
I think the polarization sells like sex sells. If it bleeds, it leads.
Bad hombre.
Hurts Americans.
Babies and other young children.
The 11 million illegal immigrants cost taxpayers about $135 billion per year.
The liberal media and the Democrats will use the image of suffering children and mothers to punch back at Trump with.
Because they need immigrants.
The media is defending illegals over law enforcement.
When I watch Abigail on the softball field, I see an all-American girl. She just graduated. She was class president, a softball star, and dreams of going to one of America's top colleges. She carries herself with confidence, as if the world is hers. At first glance, I'd never guessed that she was also carrying the stigma of being an undocumented immigrant in the United States, a label that she's embraced.
Did everyone know in your year or your class that you were undocumented? Did you have to come out, essentially?
I'm not afraid to say that I'm undocumented. If I was placed in a class with new students that didn't know me, I think one of the ways that I introduce myself is hey, I'm undocumented, because over the years getting to know people, I do come out to them in a sense. A lot of them are really, really supportive, and they don't judge, because a lot of those students come from immigrant families, and so they in a sense know what it's like because their parents are immigrants.
Where did you get this confidence from? I mean, it's quite remarkable. You know, a lot of people, I think, in your situation would sort of see themselves as a victim.
I think it just stems from knowing the struggles that my parents went through to come to America. And although I don't remember the journey over here, I do know that they had to sacrifice a lot to come over here. So I think when I'm feeling down or I'm struggling to continue, I think about their sacrifices and all the things that they had to struggle with, or all the things they had to overcome, and I think about that so that I could persevere. A lot of undocumented people are confident, and at the same time we are scared though, because we are going to face a lot of obstacles that other people aren't going to face in this country.
There are around 11 million people like Abigail in the US. Some have come here through one of the poorest borders or overstayed a temporary visa. Many came like Abigail as children with their parents. Authorised or unauthorised, many Latinos don't share the same legal status, but they often share the same stigma. And with stigma come stereotypes. We're in an era of advocacy journalism. Journalism that advocates a cause or viewpoint.
They're not.
Switch on the TV and I'm told to believe Latinos can be more or less two things. Change to another channel, I'm told to be scared. They're criminals, rapists and illegal aliens. Then switch to another and I'm told they're to be pitied, sobbing victims or the virtuous dreamer. Online, the stereotypes are further magnified. Bipolar images and headlines of good immigrants and bad immigrants are everywhere to be found. I wanted to learn more about the media's role in the shaping of immigrant stories and how it affects public opinion. More so, how those stories and stereotypes affect immigrants themselves. I spoke to Roberto Lovato, a journalist who writes extensively on immigration and Central Americans in the US. He studied the effects of media portrayals on public perception and how those portrayals of the Latino population are quite often politically motivated.
We've come to a point in history where media is now, you have your media and your right wing, and I have my media and my liberal, as opposed to left wing, right? Because left wing is kind of left out of this. But you have these two media now playing it off against each other, and that playing themselves off against each other is defining media.
Yeah.
And what we're consuming in the media now.
I mean, do you think that that's done on purpose? What's changed from, say, 30 years ago? I mean, is this an actual direct move to create a polarization? Does it benefit the media institutions behind this journey?
I think the polarization sells like sex sells. If it bleeds, it leads. If it's intense, it leads now. And the polarization, though, I think doesn't come from the media. I think it comes from society, the polarization between a vast majority of us that are kind of left out of the franchise of the United States and of the world. I did a study of the imagery during the child separation debate in the United States, the most recent one. And I looked at the national coverage in all the liberal media, especially, and in Fox. And I look at it from the perspective of how many Central Americans are in the story. Actual Central Americans who are advocates, who are organizers, who are scholars, right? As any journalist would, you would go and you would ask these people context, background, emotional context even. And I found a grand total of 0 Central Americans. The little girl separated from her mom. And in the case of Time Magazine, a little girl who wasn't even separated from her mom, that Time Magazine put on their cover next to Donald Trump as a giant. That's almost metaphoric of what the media is doing now. Cutting and pasting images for mass consumption that are utterly disconnected from reality, and whether that's a Fox News and Donald Trump talking about MS-13, or whether it's liberal media in the United States talking about Central American children and their suffering, they're both leaving out reality at this point.
I've come to spend time with Abigail and her family to find out what it's like growing up in a country where you don't legally belong. Like Abigail, her parents are undocumented, but her brother Jose Ventura was born in the US and has citizenship. Her older sisters Dahlia and Miriam are DACA recipients, a temporary amnesty program designed for children of undocumented immigrants. It was brought in by President Barack Obama in 2012, but President Donald Trump has been trying to phase it out. When the government decided not to accept any new applications, it was too late for Abigail to apply.
Tell me about the moment when you realised you weren't going to be able to apply for DACA. What did that feel like?
In my mind, I was like, I don't really need it until college. And so I think I just kept putting it off, and there wasn't this urgency in a sense. And so I think that's where I failed, because it should have been an urgency, and I should have done everything that I can to apply.
How do you feel given the fact that you've lived here your whole life, but you don't have legal papers to be here? Do you feel American? Do you feel American out on the pitch when you're playing softball?
I do feel American because I've been living here my whole life. Like, this is the only country that I know. I've gone to school. I've learned English. Like, I've worked hard to perfect my English. I've learned how to write in English, learned how to communicate with other people. I'm going to college. Like, I'm trying to achieve or pursue higher education. I want to work and I want to contribute to this country. And so I do, in a sense, feel American. But at the same time, because I don't have that paper, I feel like other people don't see me as American.
Abigail's older sister, Miriam, is the only one who remembers Mexico. She was 6 when they crossed the border, but didn't know she was illegally in the US until much later. When Trump decided to end DACA, she joined 5 other recipients who were trying to sue the Trump administration over its decision to end the program. She has a fearless drive and seems undeterred by the stereotypes she grew up with.
It wasn't until middle school that I found out that I was undocumented. And then I wanted to get a summer job. And in order to get a summer job, they asked for a social security number. When I went back to school and my friends asked, were you able to get your social? Are you going to apply to this job? I didn't want to tell them, hey, well, I don't have one. So I just said, oh no, my mom didn't let me get a job. I can't work. And that's kind of like how I played it off. It wasn't until I was at a family event, and one of my cousins came up to me and she told me, I don't know why you work so hard in school, since I was an A student. And I was like, what do you mean I can't do anything about your situation? And she's like, well, yeah, you're undocumented, so why are you working so hard in school if you won't be able to go to school and further yourself? And I think, it was coming from a very naive and ignorant place.
So how did you get around that mentality to be able to, push what your cousin said and then actually think, okay, how can I go to college even if I'm undocumented?
I think I've always been very once someone tells me that I can't do something, I'm always just well, let me prove you wrong.
DACA was a real opportunity for people like you, high achievers, exemplary, students really. But did you ever feel like people like your cousin weren't going to get an opportunity, perhaps because DACA was something that kind of handpicked the best of the immigrants?
Yeah, I think the requirements were slightly, restrictive, where they didn't allow people who were over 35 to apply. So obviously that left a lot of the pool. And it was very selective as well. It wanted people who had been in the country since 2007, people who were either in school or doing very well, and or had graduated from high school and who didn't have any criminal history. And I think for someone like me who kind of checked that box of the perfect model immigrant, it was very easy for me to get that.
But for Abigail, it's unclear where her achievements will get her.
She seems like a really impressive young woman, like an 18-year-old who's doing so well at school. She's an incredible softball player. She's so confident and she's so articulate. What can a girl like that do in this country without documents?
Life will be very hard, but I think when you have that drive and when you're so involved in the community as she is, she was able to show her character to a lot of people that really matter. And I know her teachers care so much about her, right? I know I care so, our family, we care so much about her, but it's very surreal that she might not have some of the other opportunities that I have, getting a job or an internship with X company, just because she doesn't have those digits.
We hear a lot from President Trump and others about undocumented immigrants.
Oaxaca Rivas is one of the so-called dreamers.
So you're saying that the parents who brought them to this country now have a moral right to become citizens also?
The dreamers hold a special moral status in the media coverage of immigrants. Unlike their parents, who cross with them illegally, they're blameless and are often portrayed as more deserving. They're pitted against those who, for example, may have a drug charge from years ago. They deserve to be deported and marginalised. But some feel the mainstream media present undocumented immigrants too positively. Mark Rokorian is one of them. He's the executive director of the Centre of Immigration Studies, a think tank founded by anti-immigration activist John Tanton, who in the 1980s warned about the Latin onslaught, the multiplying Latino population and its threat to Anglo-Saxon America.
Liberal media are explicitly presenting immigrants as better than the normal person. My point is, immigrants are just people like any other. They're not better, they're not worse. Some are bad, some are good. It's the same mix as anything else. The reason you have conservative media is because the supposedly mainstream media is so far to the left that there was this vacuum. If the immigration issue were being addressed by the legacy media in a balanced way, where the pluses and the minuses, the winners and the losers were more or less over time reported fully, there would be no reason to have conservative media reporting on immigration.
If I'm a Fox consumer and I'm watching Fox 6 o'clock every night, chances are I'm going to get a pretty, tainted view of immigrants in this country. Just even the words and the images, illegal aliens and criminals, rapists, whatever the use of language and the imagery is, chances are I'm going to form an opinion over how immigrants are. Is that a problem?
The word tainted is itself loaded. In other words,
but it's tainted on the liberal and on the right.
Yeah, but no, my point is the question itself comes from a particular point of view.
The question is coming from what you've just said. The question is coming from advocacy journalism. You agree that they're openly advocates for a certain agenda on both the left and the right.
Sure, yeah.
So it's tainted on both the left and the right.
Yeah, but
it might be tainted
I
in
won't
terms
use the
of
word tainted. You might use slant or even a different emphasis.
Alien and illegal alien are certainly not positive terms, but breaking the law and living in this country illegally is also not a positive action.
While crisis and controversy feeds the emerging face of advocacy journalism, how does underreporting affect the way polarised images of immigrants are viewed by loyal consumers? Obama deported 2.5 million people, the most of any president in US history. It was reported on, but Roberto says the coverage wasn't anything like the family separation crisis that unfolded under the Trump administration. What's missing here then? What are we, or what are others doing wrong? I mean, what do journalists need to do, or what do institutions need to do? Are we not covering enough angles here?
No, we're not. Everything you just mentioned, by and large, is excluded except for bad politician, good victim. We've soundbited and simplified the story to the point where it's not even journalism anymore. It's advocacy, right? It's Republicans using MS-13. The liberal media and the Democrats will use the image of suffering children and mothers to punch back at Trump with, even though they didn't do quite frankly, a damn thing when Obama was separating children from their mothers by the thousands. So what's lacking is context, what's lacking is actual journalism at this point. What we're getting is politics and propaganda disguised as journalism when, again, you don't have actual Central Americans offering context about the situation in El Salvador where death squads that are connected to government institutions like the police are pushing people out, as well as the gangs.
What about the effects of this story, especially the long-term effects on the community itself in the US? I mean, decades and decades this issue has been going on in terms of Latino immigrants in the US, but most of that story is through legal channels, the immigration. So yet, do you think that the community here has sort of been categorized under an illegal banner, despite the fact that most of the population live here legally?
The stigma of illegality and criminality has accompanied Latinos for their entire existence in the United States. So
how does that internalize in an individual? Growing up as a Latino man in the US, did you internalize some of the stereotypes?
I had to reconstitute my identity as a Salvadoran, as a Latino, as a person of the United States, because I didn't see, and I still don't see, a lot of images that resemble me. I was working in an advocacy agency and service agency, and we had children who were Central American kids, Mayan children, who would put flour on their skin, on their beautiful caramel brown skin, because they wanted to be white.
When I walk the streets of East LA, I can't help but reflect on my own perceptions, the stereotypes I've held without really knowing the full story. Armando Ibanez is a filmmaker trying to counteract Latino stereotypes through his online series Undocumented Tales. He writes, directs and stars in it, and is undocumented, like the rest of the cast and crew. He crossed the border illegally as an adult. When he finally arrived in Los Angeles from the back of a truck carrying up to 40 other immigrants, he was told to put his head down, learn English, get married, forget any dreams, and to just work. And most importantly, never tell anyone he was undocumented.
I was told that this was the land of opportunities, but then I got here and I realized that being undocumented means that you just had to live a certain type of life, a style of life, and you don't have to question anything, or you don't have to feel like you want something more, because you're not allowed to. I feel like I was asleep in some way.
How did that change? Do you still see yourself like that?
Not anymore. I spent 7 years working in a restaurant, 7 years, and for me, I feel like so tired of living the same life, just like going to work, coming to home, going to work, coming home. I couldn't go to school, and then one day I got to the job and they said, oh, there's something wrong with your social security number. We made an audit and your social security number is not correct.
He bought a social security number on the black market, a crime that could have landed him in jail. But Armando doesn't believe he should be stereotyped as a criminal. But that's considered a federal offence, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, it's something, it's like millions of people working in this country, and they gotta get a job somehow. According to law, yes, it is a federal offense. Are they really committing a crime just by surviving? All they do is go and get a social security, that fake number that they do when the government can easily do it. They can easily provide it.
How does that make you feel when they're taking taxes from you? You've got a PIN number so that you're registering yourself as a taxpayer,
yet you're not allowed to have a social security number to officially work.
Well, it sucks because not only that, but I feel like the country is taking everything out of us.
Are you guys all part of the production as well? Do you usually come in?
I waited so many years to be someone, and then I'm gonna tell my family and my friends that I wanna be an artist, a filmmaker. That's for me. I grew up thinking that artists in general, including filmmaking, is only for white people or rich people. That's how I thought. It's like I'm not allowed to dream that. That's for people who have. That's for me. It's a luxury. It's not something that. I'm poor. I'm supposed to be a lawyer, a doctor, something like big, so my family can feel proud about me. ¿Y ese quién es?
El nuevo boss boy.
The new boss boy?
Un gringo de boss boy?
He uses satire to challenge the stereotypes that Latinos live with.
I just write about how we talk, how we laugh, how we cried, but that comedy is not like I really want an audience make laugh. Like it just comes out naturally.
I guess you need it, right? I mean, it's very common for humor and comedy to soften a tragic theme.
I think that this is what some people who are not going through the undocumented experience, they don't get it, but the undocumented community, they laugh at it because that's who we are. Like at the end of the day, we laugh. So people who are not used to live the experience, they're a little bit like, I've never seen this. Like, I've never seen people laughing, undocumented people on the screen laughing. Awkward. Like, what are you talking about? Like, so they don't cry like 24/7? Like, no, we do cry, but we also laugh. We want to have a normal life.
Massive protests by Dreamers in 2006 inspired Armando to be more open about his status. But he also felt like the movement held the immigrant community back.
Do you think the Dreamer movement has helped young people?
I feel like that's also like the good immigrant narrative. Like now the new Dreamer movement, it's like damaging the immigrants narrative in general, because now politicians and I feel like a mainstream audience is managing like, oh, Dreamers are going to school, they speak English, they didn't choose to be here because they were brought to this country when they were kids. They deserve to stay here. We deserve to fight for them.
I'm back with the Gonzaleses at their weekly barbecue get-together. The house is open to extended relatives and neighbours. It's clear their Mexican culture is what ties their community, but their sense of belonging is right here in the US.
How do you find ways you can identify with people in the media? Like, is there a website? Is there some link on Facebook that you might kind of engage in that you can feel connected to? What kind of media do you use that makes you feel part of a wider community?
There's Undocumented. That's like one of the ones.
Undocumented?
Yeah, it's like a page for undocumented, like relatable undocumented memes and gifs and just like just things to talk about that other undocumented people can relate to. That's like the one that comes to mind, but I don't know.
I think for me it's like with BuzzFeed, they have like a Me Too and like a pedo like separate segments, and I think I can connect with those because it's like Hispanic people and they express and show their culture like throughout the videos.
There are countless definitions of what immigrants are in the mainstream media, and the Gonzalez sisters say the Latino stereotypes in films and on television are dramatised caricatures, something they laugh at rather than get bothered by. But how do a lack of Latino protagonists in the mainstream media affect the way their stories are consumed?
So the news story doesn't even show Central Americans advocating for themselves when they've been advocating more than anyone for 30 years on behalf of Central Americans. Instead, the story has white activists being the protagonists in a Central American story, which is the way the media likes to consume it. It's like the movies. You don't have Latino superheroes in Marvel yet. So you don't have Latino superheroes in Latino stories in the United States.
When you talk about the state of television news in particular in the US, it sounds pretty dark, I have to say. I mean, what's the answer? No more news, no media?
I think we're reaching a point where the polarization in society is such that people will have to take matters into their own hand, and they will have to start taking control of media in the United States at some point, or abandoning that project in its totality because the media is not serving them. We only hear gangs are driving people out when no, the story is more complex. We don't hear about US policy in Central America, in Latin America, around the world that pushes people. When you have economic and trade deals that destroy entire industries, we know what happens here in the United States because a lot of people in the United States are victims to that now and sensitive to it. So why don't we report about that in the rest of the world?